Hi, my name is Anthony. I live in Burbank, California. I lived here in the 80s. I used to go quite often to Studio One. Studio One was important for the community because it was primarily like the only major club that people knew of. Around the corner was Motherlode. Now, I became aware of Motherlode when I was in my teens because I watched a movie called Making Love with Harry Hamlin and Michael Ontkean. And I think it's Aunt Keen or Aunt Keen, something like that. And they showed the scene where they were in the Motherlode. So when I was like 16, 17 years old, I said, when I go to LA, I'm going to go to that bar. Sure enough, I come to LA, I find West Hollywood, and I find a Motherlode. And yeah, I had to go in there, but I didn't have the ID, so I couldn't get in until I swiped my uncle's ID, which was a funny story in itself because my grandmother lived in Inglewood and I was visiting her, and my uncle was taking a shower, and I happened to be in the bedroom and I saw his wallet. And I said, "Oh, I look just like my uncle." And so I took his ID. And the story to this day is they never knew who took it. I guess they never could figure out. My uncle just thought he lost it, so he had to go get another ID. But I used that ID for quite a few years until I turned 21 to get into the bars. Yeah, I Studio One was everyone's moniker to end up going there. Now they had other bars called Rage, and then there was Circus, and there were some other bars that were pretty fun to go to. But my go-to was Studio One, and of course, when I met my partner, we became kind of like nesters, and so from that point on, I kind of stopped going because I was in love and involved in a relationship at the time. I was very good friends with Ernie Caruthers and Scott Forbes, who ran the Studio One at the time. And well, that was my hangout joint. I loved it. I was in my 20s. I lived in West Hollywood on Palm. I was living in my element. uh, so as I was watching these videos, I saw people talk about Studio One and running the streets of West Hollywood. And well, that's exactly what I did. I did the same thing. I actually um, became Mr. West Hollywood at some point where I don't remember. I think I did a contest at the Brass Rail and I won $500. And that gave me the title of Mr. West Hollywood. So I used to be on the floats for Pride Festival for Studio One and just really loved being a part of the West Hollywood scene back then. My friends and I used to always go to Studio One. It was either Wednesday night or Thursday night to watch Dynasty. Now, that was a very popular thing back then. We used to get there early. Everyone would crowd around on the floor and sit down and watch these big screens in Studio One and watch Dynasty. And of course, who was my favorite? Diane Carroll, Dominique Devereaux. And so it was just great being able to go and watch Dominique Devereaux and Joan Collins and Crystal and all of them. Just wow, it was what I looked forward to for the whole week. Uh, and then of course after the show would be over with, they turn the music back on and we'd get up and start dancing. And oh, I would stay until maybe 1 a.m. even though I had to work. I worked in Beverly Hills at the time. So since I lived in West Hollywood and worked in Beverly Hills, my commute was minimal. Um, I just did love going there. I will admit, though, in the early days of going to Studio One before I met Ernie, I used to have a hard time getting in there. They wouldn't let me in. I would have an ID that I stole from my uncle because I looked just like him. And they wouldn't question the ID. I just think at the time, Studio One was not allowing too many young black men in the facility at the time. I didn't know or realize that at the time. I just thought maybe they realized I was young. But lo and behold, I ended up becoming friends with Ernie Caruthers, met him at a party somewhere, and then found out that he was affiliated with Studio One, and that's how we became friends. And Ernie really opened my eyes to a lot in West Hollywood. He took me to Palm Springs and took me to see a lot of the drag shows way back, before I even knew anything about drag. So I had a really good friendship with him, and sadly lost him to AIDS too. Uh, I would confide in him. I would go to him for everything. During that time, I was pursuing a career as a bodybuilder, and Ernie would encourage me. I did all the local West Hollywood shows, and then next thing I knew, I came up for a big show to do a bodybuilding show in Culver City, the Los Angeles Muscle Classic. Well, I did that show, and out of 13 guys, I got third place. And I met Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he looked at me and said, "You've got great genetics. You should keep it up." And that's what encouraged me to continue going. So, yeah, I look back on those days and I really had a good time. But I struggled. I was young, naive, didn't make enough money, had to work, pay my bills. I had a car repossessed. I had to ride the bus to work. And that's when I met my first real boyfriend. His name was Tim. Ernie Caruthers really liked going to those clubs, those bars where they sang, and he had an amazing voice himself. And one day he heard me singing and said, "You should perform at the Rose Tattoo." Well, I started taking voice lessons from, oh my gosh, I can't remember his name, but he ended up being the voice coach on American Idol. His name was Michael something. And I remember the song I was singing was "Hello" from Lionel Richie. And I got in front of everyone and I got stage fright and forgot the words. And yet Ernie was in the audience and a couple of other people. And someone in the audience just looked at me and said, "I've been alone with you." And I went, "Oh, thank you." And picked up the words. But I never pursued it after that. I did it. It was kind of like getting over some stage fright of the Rose Tattoo, which was also a very popular spot for celebrities, and people would come there all the time. But again, I don't know whatever happened to all those places. And now it's an empty lot because they're building some mass construction there now to this day. As I became more involved with the group of people at Studio One, I met friends like Randy Bustamante, Arlie Miller, people who were also very much involved with the Studio One scene. Lost Randy Bustamante to AIDS. He died. I was devastated. I hung out with him all the time. Had no idea he was not well. In addition to him, I became really good friends with Kelly Cole. Now, Kelly Cole was Natalie Cole's son. Brother, I'm sorry. Not his son, brother. And I didn't realize he was related to her until someone told me that his sister was Natalie Cole. Kelly and I were kind of rivals, but we were friends. It seemed like we were both two attractive black men in the younger years, and we were also interested in the same men. So we used to butt heads all the time. However, I ended up winning, and I got one of his ex-boyfriends and had him for a long time. Sadly, Kelly got very ill, and the boyfriend that I was with, we went to visit him at Cedars-Sinai. And while we were in the hospital room, Natalie walked in, and she smiled and said hello and greeted us. And I was in the midst of Natalie Cole. She was an amazing woman. And sadly, when Kelly passed, went to the funeral and sat right next to Natalie Cole, and she held my hand during his service. So these are memories that I have of this time. And wow, I know that when I found out Ernie from Studio One was not well, I raced to his bedside, and sadly he passed as well. I went to his funeral, and Scott Forbes and hundreds of people were there at Forest Lawn. And in fact, I go and visit Ernie's resting site at Forest Lawn in Burbank because I live right near him, and I stop in just to say hello to him to this day. I have a lot of history with this town and living in LA. So to be honest with you, I don't really know what happened to Studio One because, okay, I moved to San Diego
Okay, so you lost
and I lost touch with a
connection,
lot of
literally.
people
Yeah, yeah.
because I met my second partner and he was a doctor in San Diego
Okay.
and I moved to be with him. Ernie had passed away. I
Right.
lost touch with Scott Force, but I don't know what happened to
Right.
Studio One, why it shut down or why it changed. Well, I can honestly say back then it was a lot more fun going out to the clubs, getting all dressed up and gussied up and looking good and meeting people. It just seemed to be a better time where you physically touched and saw people. Today, with the applications and all of the whatnot, it's different. Um, I don't know. I don't enjoy the applications so much as I did when I was younger, meeting people face to face. The technology has changed a lot. I'm finding that today, not too many men want to be involved in relationships long term. I'm noticing a difference in just a quick hookup and then move on to the next. I've been there, I've experienced it myself. So it's not what I'm interested in. However, until you got to keep kissing a lot of frogs until you meet your prince. And that's exactly what these sites offer you today, which is a different way when you used to go to the clubs. Because you used to go to the clubs and you used to kiss a lot of frogs and until you met your prince. So, yeah, the technology has changed a lot to this day about it.